Alright, for this 8832 tutorial, I want to cover a scenario where we have a foreign partnership, so this is a non-US partnership, that wants to change its default tax classification. So we're going to have a Bermuda limited partnership here that is by default treated as a partnership for federal income tax purposes, but instead it wants to file an election to be a corporation. So I've got the 8832 in front of us here. I'll go through the 2 pages that we need to fill out, and then I've also got one slide here that just covers the election elements itself, and then the fact pattern that we're going to be working with and why we want to make the election. So general filing requirements for this. So if you want to submit an 8832 entity classification election, the entity you're filing this for has to be considered an eligible entity. So this is either a U.S. domestic eligible entity or a foreign eligible entity. And that's important because there are certain types of corporate entities that are classified as corporations, and they have to stay corporations, right? The check the box regulations do not apply to these entities. You can't change their default treatment. So foreign eligible entities, you can find what the qualifications are in the regulations. And so a foreign eligible entity is going to by default be a partnership if it has 2 or more members and at least one of those members does not have limited liability. So when we talk about foreign partnerships, specifically limited partnerships have a general partner and then they have limited partners. And so that's why when we look at a foreign LP, depending on the country, because sometimes foreign limited partnerships would be treated as corporations, but in our case we have a Bermuda limited partnership that is a foreign eligible entity, and it is treated as a partnership by default. Now the 8832, if we're going to file this to change its classification, it should be timely filed, right? So that's generally within 75 days of the desired effective date, and it needs to be signed by all the partners, all the owners, or an authorized rep. So for limited partnerships, you can get away with just the general partner or the GP filing the election and signing the election, and that's what we're going to have here. So in our fact pattern, we have Jane Doe. She opens a Bermuda LP on March 19th, 2023. So Jane is going to be the general partner, and as of the formation, the partnership has just one other LP, one other limited partner, which is a corporate entity in Bermuda. Now, the plan down the road here is Jane is going to run an investment partnership. So this is going to be a fund, and they're going to issue limited partnership units to investors, and these investors are going to be both in the U.S. and outside the U.S. So under the default rules, this LP is going to be treated as a foreign partnership for U.S. federal tax purposes. So any U.S. investors are going to get pass-through tax treatment as a foreign partnership. Now, the tax advisors have looked at this, and given these circumstances, they recommended, well, we're better off not being a foreign partnership. Maybe we want to be a corporation, and then it'll be a PFIC. So passive foreign investment company, or PFIC for federal tax purposes. If you want the entity to be treated as a PFIC, well, it can't be a partnership, right? It has to change its classification to a corporate entity, and then the PFIC rules will apply here. So Jane prepares the 8832 to elect that the foreign entity be classified as an association, taxable as a corporation for federal tax purposes. All right, so if we take a closer look at the 8832 itself, so in order to file this for a foreign entity, you need an EIN. So that's very, very important. You can't submit this without an EIN. So the Bermuda Investment LP, the first thing it would have done is filed an SS4 to get an EIN. And then once it has its EIN, it can file this entity classification election. So we got the name of the entity, the EIN that's assigned to it, and then the address of the company. Now, in the check here section, notice there's a couple of boxes, right? We don't have any address changes, and we are timely filing this. And so because it's being timely filed, we don't need to indicate that we have late classification relief, right? So because it's being submitted within 75 days of that desired effective date, we can go ahead and just leave those items off. All right, so the type of the election, so this is an initial classification by a newly formed entity, right? So it's not a change in classification. In other words, 1B would occur if we had already filed this 8832 before. So if we filed it before to make it, let's say, a corporation, and then we want to change it back to a partnership, then we would have a change. But in our case, 1A is the appropriate selection because this is an initial classification, so an initial filing for a newly formed entity. Now in item 3, it's asking us, do we have more than one owner? And the answer is yes, right? So we have a limited partnership with 2 members right now, right? So we have a GP and 1 limited partner. In the future, we'll have more partners. So we indicate yes, and that gives us the option to either be taxed as a partnership or an association taxable as a corp. Okay, so item 4 and 5 we can leave blank because those do not apply to us. So part 1, item 6, the type of the entity. So there's 6 options here, right? So again, this can only be filed for domestic eligible entities or foreign eligible entities. In our case here, we are going with 6D, right? So we have a foreign eligible entity that's electing to be classified as an association taxable as a corporate entity, okay? Now, item 7, we have to fill this out because we have a foreign company. So if you're filing this for a U.S. entity, you would leave 7 blank. But in our case, this is an entity organized in a foreign country. So we tell the IRS that this is a Bermuda entity, okay? Now, item 8, when do we want the election to be effective? Well, we want it to be effective on the same date of formation, right? So we enter the date of formation there, so that's fine. The contact information for the person we want to, the IRS to get a hold of if they have any questions about the election. So Jane Doe, she's the general partner, and then enter the telephone number to be able to contact Jane. Then the consent statement, right? So normally you would want all of the owners of an entity to sign and date this and then provide the appropriate title. But only one person has to sign if that individual is authorized to sign this election on behalf of everybody, right? And that is often the case with limited partnerships, right? You have a limited partnership, the GP or the general partner is authorized to make all these decisions on behalf of the limited partnership. So the limited partners they're just passive investors, right? So they invest their capital, but all of those decisions, including ones like this, are made by that GP. Okay, so Jane would complete this, sign it, date it, and then go ahead and mail it to the appropriate IRS office. Now, as far as where to mail this, always check the 8832 instructions. So the instructions will include multiple addresses, right? There's different offices for foreign companies that want to file an election, and then other offices for U.S. domestic entities. So Jane will want to check the instructions, make sure she's got the appropriate IRS address, and go ahead and send this off to that IRS office, and then just wait to hear back from them, right? So the IRS should send you a confirmation that the election was received and approved, and then year after year, right, Jane can treat this entity as a corporate entity, and so they'll get that PFIC treatment that they're after. Okay, so that covers it for this video. I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to leave me a comment below, and I look forward to seeing you again on the next video. Thank you.